So now we have the estimated cost, and then we can bring our job cost into view here. Let's rename this one. Makes it a little bit smaller so we can get it. And generally after that, this is when they want to come in with their open purchase order amount. What's remaining? I tell you what, I'm going to drag this. I'm going to make this a little bit smaller here so we can see what's being dragged down here. So it's under the purchase order line. And let's go to the purchase order open amount. Let's drag that in here. At some point, people would like to make a calculation, but I'm not ready to get into calculations at this point. They may want to say, you know, total cost. That's the way they would like to do that. But for now, just bear with me. Then after that, again, you know, just looking at very typical, people would say, I'd like to have my payroll hours. So this is just a field that we've created for you, and you can drag this into your report. You can say hours. And this is not necessarily the way people look at it automatically, but in general, okay? Then after we go to the payrolls, and they say, well, I would like to know how much did we bill. So I've got an income line, income amount field, right? And you drag that in. So now you can say income or billed, however you want to call it. And then you'd like to know what you have been received, what's been received against that billing. That's more common. People don't usually look at it open. They generally ask what's been paid. So we have a field that's just say income paid amount. And then there's one more piece, and this one doesn't say income. It says job line credit unapplied amount. Okay. And again, this is cases where somebody has, it could be retainage, it could be just, it's usually retainage. I don't know what else might be, but it could be a piece that hasn't been applied to a particular invoice, right? So I can take this, I can drag this into my report as well. So this is telling me something has been received but not applied against any particular invoice type of transaction is labeled as income. So, and then lastly, people would like to know what is open, how much they still owe on the job. Right? If they have a lot of bills, they'd like to know how much has not been paid yet. So we actually have a job cost open amount field over here. So a gentleman is here. I can't believe this. He actually was originally from Tanganyika, which is now Tanzania. I mean, only in my world would this happen. Welcome to the webinar. I'm so happy you're here. I can't believe I said that out of the blue. I'm flabbergasted here. I'm looking at that comment. Oh, that's great. That's a great story. I love that one. I love that one. Okay, we have our open job cost here. So, you know, I've been a little slow. I've been trying to produce some of this here a little bit slower. So think about this. For people that would have to generate 5 reports, export and cut and paste in Excel, probably take them hours or days. You know, you just did this. Really, you could do this in about 20 seconds. And all your information, all your details are here. Okay? Then you might want to say, well, I'd like to be able to do a calculation that tells me what is my estimate versus actual. Right? So the great thing that is in PowerPivot, and you had these in a regular pivot table. I am going to go back to the regular pivot table here just for one moment, just to show you. So in a regular pivot table, they have something called a calculated field, right? And this calculated field was pretty rudimentary. It allowed you to do simple subtraction, like one column from another. But the problem is you couldn't do any type of what I call if statement. I couldn't say if this item is this, or if these dates are this, or if the job type is this, or the item type. You couldn't do that in a regular Excel spreadsheet in Pivot. However, in PowerPivot, you just have all kinds of flexibility. So on the PowerPivot tab that I'm up here, right, you can click on something called New Measure, and this is how you actually create your calculations here. I already have one created, but we're just going to start one here just for the moment. I'm going to call this estimate versus actual. All right. And the way to start your formula, this is a language, so to speak. It's got its own language. They call it DAX, Data Access Exchange, something. I forget what they call it. But it's very much Excel-like. There are websites. I'll post those for you so that there are websites out here that do this very deeply. But you know what? There's only really about one or two formulas you guys need to know to be able to do what you need to do. And I did cover that in last week's webinar. But if you would like to be able to just subtract one column from another, I'm going to start J. So this gives me the job cost details. And you need to look for the one that says sum of. You don't want to say job line, job cost amount. Okay? You don't do this. You're going to get an error. Not going to discuss the details behind that, technical details. You want to go down to the one that says sum of. So you see sum of. So here's my sum of job line estimate cost. And I'm just going to subtract. I go to J, and then we want the sum of the job cost amount. You can check your formula, says no errors, and it's great. It gives you the ability to format your column the way you want. So we can do decimal number, we want 1,000 separator. And now you have a simple calculation for your report, right? Now, if we look at some of the you can see I already did an estimate versus actual. I had one in here. I'm going to take this one here, and I'm going to delete this just for now. All right. So I highlight it, and I go up here to the X where it says delete measure. So since we already created, if you want to see what this calculation looks like, it's going to look the same thing, I believe. Yeah, estimate minus actual. You can just drag this field into your report here. And then you'd probably like to know what is your percent complete, right? I've already got this. We already did this for you here. So again, I can click on my measure settings up here to see what that calculation is like. So just to show you what this is, let's put this in a notepad that I can make a little bit bigger for you. Okay. So this percent complete is saying that, right, we want to make sure we test for 0. So it says if my job line estimate count is 0, then return 0. Else, take the job cost amount divided by estimated cost amount. Okay. Simple, pretty simple Excel formula. It's just that you have to define, what is the field name. And the way I did the field name is that I would come in here and type the first character the factual table, I had the information, and then it would give me a list, right? So you could drag this percent complete into your reports, drag this all the way down to the bottom down here, anything. Is everybody else here okay? Is there someone I see, one poor person not hearing, unfortunately? And if you guys were in last week's session, great thing about PowerPivot is you can create your own KPIs. So I can click on this, and since it's a percentage, your absolute value is going to be 1, not 100, right? And I'm going to leave these as default. I'm just doing this as an example. So now you've got these fancy little color balls here that you can assess just by looking at something, whether it falls in the range criteria that you gave it, right? You could also sort by this method here. KPIs are a neat thing, and again, the value of being able to look at something in a glance is pretty good stuff. Pretty good stuff. Okay, I'm going to take those out of here for the moment. Let's take this out. All right, so now we dealt in terms of what a typical report is. Now, one of the things that's going to happen when you have such a large amount of data is that you've got to be able to filter this out in some fashion. And what's curious to me, again, over the years, working with people, hardly ever anybody uses the job end date, the start date, the anticipated end date, or even the job status. If I were to estimate the percentage of people that use that, it would probably be 50%, surprisingly enough, okay? And yet, that is and part of that is because you can't use a lot of those fields when you're going into QuickBooks, so when you're reporting. And so, you know, as pro advisors, most of us, and we've been doing this over the years, we come up with the most convoluted methods to be able to get the reporting that we want, whether it's a custom field or we slam something into a description or a memo field, or, I mean, there's so many ways that we've been doing this. The great thing about this is that you can actually use QuickBooks as it was intended, which is nice, right? It means you don't have to go around the back of doing things. So slicers, again, this is from the previous pivot tables. Slicers are nothing more than filters, right? In other words, this is a slicer. I have the job name, so I'm going to bring the job name in again just so you can see how this works. All right. If I go to this job folder here, we actually have a couple other filters here. I could go job active. I'm going to bring that into filters area. I'm going to say, what's the difference between a filter and a slicer? Nothing really. It's the same thing. It's just that one I use to be able to quickly look at something, and the other one is kind of a permanent filter. So I'm going to take this job name, and I'm going to bring it into the slicers. And you see a slicer, just a little box here, right? I can scroll down. There's a list of all my jobs. And it just allows me to quickly look at something to get a view of the data. So I don't have to scroll through things. And a lot of times if you're looking, job status is one of those things that people can use to filter their data. So if you're saying, I would like to look at the jobs that are in progress, that's a whole lot easier to do than trying to have to run through something and then filter it out, et cetera, okay? Now you'll see that I have filters as well in the filter area. These filters apply to all jobs, and a slicer is just an easier way of performing the same thing. I could take this job status and I could put it in the report filter area, okay? I could have done the same thing here. I could have just picked in progress. If I want to do that, I want to pick closed. I could have done the same thing, right? But it's just that this is fewer steps for me to, if I do it this way, I have to go through one more step to do something, right? I just like the fact that I have a list. I can just click on it and it gets me my information. So again, you're really going from reporting to analysis. There are three different things that we do, right? Everybody does. You have reporting, which is a traditional method of, we're going to cut down 50 million trees and print out a large report, and we're going to keep it, look at it once, and we store it in some file cabinet, it never goes, or maybe you put it in the PDF file. But that's a more traditional way of looking at things. And analysis is really more about how do I look at my data in different ways, but I have the power to do that. I don't have to pay a programmer to do something like that. Then, of course, you get data visualization, which Excel 2013 has fantastic capabilities of doing that. Or you buy something like Tableau, or use one of those like the Web KPI or the Corealytics, or some of these, or even the Biz Tools. You have these people that have created these online mishmash, as I call it, good mishmash, where you have the fancy graphs and things like that. But for job costing, it's more about analysis, as in my opinion, is what I've seen. Okay, so again, the various ways you can do this, and you notice we have projected end date, and you're saying, well, what are these dates? If you notice, these are month ending dates. So let's go back to the calendar. Notice that we have calendars for projected end and start date here. So a date dimension, as I described earlier, these are just different ways of looking at the same date, right? If I were to drag this projected end date over here, let's take, I'll just drag it down, projected end date. Let's drag this down under job name. Let's take out the item for a second. It'll make it easier to view. Of course, you notice that in a pivot table, right, you got these little crosses here, right? You can click on that and it expands the information. Okay. And Curiousy's got, oh, I know why there's two projected end dates in here, but this is just a different way of saying I would like to see what is the projected end date for a particular item, right? So I've got the 12/10/2010. If I click this month that it's projected to be in, if I click that, you can see that is what remains, right? So again, it's just a different way of looking, or an easier way of looking at certain types of information within your Power Pivot table, right? You can look at status, you can look at name, you can use a projected end date, you could use a start date, right? Now I also have several of the filters in here. We have job type, right? That's another thing that you might use, right, to quickly look at something. So I could bring in job type into my slicers. So I just want to look at new construction jobs, right? Could use active. This is generally something that, is an overall thing. These were all active in this particular point. This is another one here that is curious. Has active estimates. One of the weird things that QuickBooks did in their estimates system all right, where did they stick this for me here? Well, I'm losing my mind here. I'm looking for the slot here that says estimate is active. When you run your reports in QuickBooks, right, you go this estimates, let's do a summary type of thing. It's only going to give you information if the estimate is still active. And it's kind of a weird, usually you would say if the job is active. And you don't like to put a transaction because that one transaction, you may have multiple estimates for a job. So just because one is or isn't kind of defines the way your report comes out. That's not a really good way to do that. They probably had some reason. It may have been there for forever. And in our case, all we've done is just saying, look, you can just filter whether by jobs that have active estimates or not. We just assign it to the whole job. Okay, so next on our list of things to look at, that was kind of the report pieces. All right, let's do this one next. Now we're going to look at the what I call the QB best practices, or in my terminology, Band-Aids to get you what you need. So we're going to look now, we're going to look at change orders, categorizing cost, date filtering, and handling of managers, supervisors, and sales reps, or at least how we do it or how we've learned to do it over the years. Okay. First one is sales orders. This is a big one. I mean, change orders rather. One of the difficulties in QuickBooks, and again, let's see if we can, I think I had one earlier. Here we go. This is the worst thing known to the QuickBooks world. The dreaded change order that is put into a description field within an estimate, because people would like to know, you know, what is my change order? And generally it is a different type of a different estimate altogether. Sometimes it's on the same estimate. I'm going to show you how we actually deal with this. And there are several ways. Again, there's no one way. We just, you know, it's up to the client to decide what they want to do. One way we can do this is by the use of templates. Okay? You can create a template that says change order. I should have set this up prior. My apologies. You can create a template that says change order, and another one, this one does say change order, and another one that says just custom estimate, right? And then you could, in our technology, you could go in Excel and create a calculated field that says if my template says change order, then I want the change order information for that estimate. There's only one problem and drawback to that. You can't create a negative estimate, right? So if you had a negative change order, then this system would not work for you. Okay? So we've actually come up with a different way here. So I'm in multi-user mode. Let me switch to single user here. Again, my apologies. I thought I already had this here, but probably might be good for people to see anyway. Okay. I'm going to go to the item list here. And item, I want to edit the item. We're going to go to custom fields here. And you see I actually already created one here. I created a custom field at the line item level called status. And this is original or change order. Now, there's caveats to this too, because some people don't like changing original sales order, original estimate. Once I've created that, I am not changing it. I don't like to. So you're kind of stuck sometimes as to, you know, you got a half a dozen one or the other. But what I like what we can do is that in this case, so here's one, here's status. We can say this is original, right? We have a quantity of 5. And then I can come next time, I can go blueprints in here. And I can say -1, right? And then this becomes a change order. And now Cube is able to go in and again look at that custom field and says if this status, this custom field says change order, then they want the information about this. Now again, I'm not going to go into step-by-step through all the details, just wanted to give you the general way. This particular method is probably the most used by the suggestions that we've given. It's just, again, it's an option. So to repeat, the options are you've got different templates with a different template name, but the caveat is that the estimate may be negative and you can't create a negative estimate in QuickBooks, or use a custom field at the line item level in which you use a change order and just a drop down. One's original and another's in a change order. And again, this is probably the most prevalent use of that particular feature. So that would be the next one. That would be the next one. Okay. Now let's go into categorizing cost. So just for a moment here, let's get rid of all of these. I want to get rid of all this stuff here. The only thing I want here is estimated cost and job cost, just these two things. Whoops, payroll, how did that get up here? Take that out of here. So this is all we're going to deal with, just this estimated and job cost. So as I showed you with some of the reports that we get before, people would like to be able to split out by materials, you know, a service, other costs, et cetera, et cetera. Well, a large part of this has to do with how you set up your QuickBooks file. How well, let me go back here. What we have done in Cube is that we've actually created these fields for you, and you go, well, Chuck, how can you do that? Because how do you define? We haven't defined what they are. By default, labor is a service item. By default, materials is non-inventory, inventory, and assembly, right? And then you could create a calculated field to get your other cost. That's the way we've done this out of the box, because that way somebody can just create a report in 2 seconds if they want to split it out. However, as most of us know, again, you're working in the field, everybody's got this set up in such a discombobulated way that, you know, they have freight under, you know, a non-inventory, and then they get another type of freight under service. And in other words, they may have service that really is not service, and they may have non-inventory that is service, and that's just the way they set it up. So now you're gone into expensive mode, because in order to do that, you have to physically categorize which items fit into which piece. And you don't want to do it item by item. If somebody's got 10,000 items, it's going to cost you a fortune to create that report, because somebody's got to manually do a mapping for that. And then what if they change? What if they add items? You're going to be stuck, okay? So there is one way that we get around this, and again, it can be problematic, because if they've been using the QuickBooks file for a long time, it doesn't work very well. Okay. Let's go to your list of items here. So we had one report I showed you with subcontractors. What you do is you create a parent account, and you say this is going to be materials, or it's going to be service, or it's going to be subcontractors. And that way, no matter what you put underneath this, now this example I am going to show you, I can actually go in and say, if this top level item is subs, then give me the information, and that will become my subcontractor. This way, you never have to go back to a programmer or anybody. You don't have to go back through and map anything personally, because it all falls under subs. Whatever you put here, you can add ad nauseum. It's going to fit under subs, and therefore you'll have your information. That is the easiest way to do this, bar none for us. When they want to categorize cost by material, and it's really, I don't want to say it's funny, because it's sad a lot of times. You're talking to these people, they don't think about this like we do, right? We're trying to, you know, I have to take my accountant head off when I'm doing this. I have to think like a programmer and think I's and O's. And so I try to ask a client, I go, okay, how do I know what is materials? Well, here it's in the item list. And I go, okay, point them out for me. And then you ask them, well, what's common about these? And you can see when they start hemming and hawing. And I go, how do I do that? Do I read your mind? What if you add something? And you can always hear the pin drop, because there's a realization of going, God, I screwed up here, and God, oh, this is going to be terrible. So what do we do? So when you tell them the cost of something, you know, is 5 or 6 hours as opposed to, you know, 15 minutes, then they go, well, they're going to do the 15 minutes, right? That's what they're going to go for. So in this case here, I'm going to do a calculated field here in a measure. I can do a new measure here. And I'm going to do subs here. So this is the other one. Again, if you had seen this in my last one, this formula, calculate formula, is the biggest piece of information you need to know for all Power Pivot tables. If you know this one formula, you can do probably 99% of what you need to do with detailed job costing in a Power Pivot table, or anything within a Power Pivot table, because this now becomes your if statement. Okay? Because I'm going to create an if statement calculation that says, if my item top level name is subs, then I want the job cost amount. So you start out with this calculate, and I have this for you. I'm going to paste this for you so you guys can see this here. You can just paste it in. I'm going to go through it one here. So the first thing I do is I go get the job cost details, and I want the sum, again, of the job cost amount. And then the second piece of this is my filter. You may not be able to say it's too small, but it says calculate. The first says expression. Expression means what is the thing that I want to measure, and then after that, how many filters do I want to do? We're going to do one filter, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my item list, and you see that I have hierarchy level 1 through 5. Okay? What this does is this isolates the name at each level. You're going, well, what does that mean? Okay. I've had a hard time explaining that one for over years, so I will try and do my best here. Actually, QuickBooks actually kind of use this. You see they call what they call a hierarchical view. That's what this is. This is hierarchy level 1. This is hierarchy level 2, right? And in QuickBooks you can have up to 5 levels. It does that for customers. It does that for items, right, the job types. So that's what we mean by hierarchy level, okay? So we isolate the name here. If I isolated the name at level 2, I know it's part of subs, but it just gives me the name carpet, okay? If you had to program that, it would take you a long time to do it, so we just made it easy for you. So hierarchy level 1, right, we know that's where sub is at. It's at the top level. And we're going to say equal to subs. Then we close the parentheses. Check our formula. Oops. And I should have put double quotations marked around the subs. My fault there. Now we have no errors. Changes to a number. Use the separator. Now you see it's returned just the information. If I were to drag the items in here, which we should do, I could have done the same thing for estimate, right? I could have estimated a sub amount. Let's do this in a way that you would recognize as hierarchy 1. And this has got a subtotal on it. There's a reason that it splits all at 1980. That was a bad idea. I shouldn't have shown it to you that way. Power Pivot table is going to reduce it for every line. So I tell you what, I can't do that because it's not going to show you a proper way. You have to trust me on this. I broke this down. This is going to be just what the sub amount is on that part. And then I could have done the same. I could have taken this formula and instead of the line job cost amount, I could have substituted. I could have just typed estimate in here. That would have been my estimated portion. So I could add estimated subs. I could add actual subs. So that's how you kind of get around your limitation or the problem that you may have in QuickBooks if somebody's got a file that just doesn't follow the normal protocol. Okay. All right, let's get rid of that. We don't need that field. Okay, there's one other thing to do in here, and that's in terms of dates. You have a problem we remember back in the beginning of this, I said that we have estimated, you can do your estimate 1 year. It might take you 2 years to do the job. So the problem is if I were to have some type of date filter, okay, and I'm going to simplify this. I'm being over simplified here. I'm going to go transaction date for the calendar. And I want to take this year number and bring it down to the report filter as opposed to an actual date, and just trying to simplify this. Right? If I were to filter this out for a particular year, okay, yeah, probably a bad example that I used here. There we go. It filters all of the data. So what happens if I had an estimate that didn't fall within that date, right? As you can see, all my estimated costs are gone. So I actually have something in here that accounts for. This right up here is actually for estimate dates. It's a blank. And it includes the estimate. Now, behind the scenes there is that I have something called an estimate date. And again, this is something Uncle Chuck put in there because this is very typical of what people do, right? Estimate is way before the actual cost, but then they're trying to filter out certain costs for a particular period, and they're not able to do it because it filter out the estimated cost. So that's how we get around that. So anytime that you see a blank in one of these dimensions, this is going to represent the estimate date. Probably a better way I could explain that, but that's the best I can do for now. Unfortunately, you know, it's one of these things, you're trying to make it easy for people to use, and some people don't know what I did. Sometimes I don't remember what I put in here. Okay, so anyway, that's how you handle the date. Otherwise, you could do another measure. We talked about the measure here. I could create a new measure where I could do some type of date range. And I'm going to paste these for you guys here because I need to post these probably otherwise. These are several ways of doing the same thing. Both of these arrive at the same place. Okay. This one's fairly simple, the second one I sent you. Because what it says, I want the job cost amount for the month number equals to 10, and then the year number equals 2005. Right? General people are looking within a month period. That's the easiest way to do that. If you want one that actually does a particular date, then that's the first one that I sent you. And I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll put that into this one. You can see it. So what this is saying, it says, I want to calculate the sum of the job cost amount. And there's a function here called date between. And the date is, calendar date is the first piece of that. And I want a date from. And then I want a date to. And you notice that they're not dashes or slashes or commas in the date function that Excel provides. Okay. Again, this is just Excel. It's not me. This is, or Q. This is just Excel. Okay. So if I were to do this here, it's going to error in calculation. What did I do? I beg your pardon? What do you mean you can't find transaction date? Let's see, did I spell something different here? Okay, let me post that one to you again. I guess that had an error, didn't realize it. There you go. There. Now you'll have your costs that fall within that particular date range. Again, you could never do this type of thing in a regular pivot table. You just couldn't do that. All right, I'm getting close on time, so I'm going to just kind of cover a couple points, and I want to get to the labor analysis and the time tracking. I've included two other reports in here. These are typical. This is an over-under report here, right? And all you're doing is trying to arrive at under billings that appear as an asset, and then over billings that appear as a liability or to book into your balance sheet. And all of these pieces here are all sitting here. You can see how it created these formulas, right? This says advanced details. When you get this, make sure you click on default perspective, because you'll say, well, where are all those formulas? Okay. So I had the percent complete. We had the estimated revenue and the earned revenue and the actual revenue. All of these are sitting in here, and that way you can see how we've done this. You know what I tell people? They said this would literally take you hours to do out of QuickBooks, so to speak. And although they have, I think they have reports now that do closer to this. But again, to do this at a glance is nice to be able to do. I also included one that is much larger. This is what we call a bonded report that we typically see. Somebody's got to give it to the bank. This has got all kinds of formulas in it, but again, we've already created them for you. Again, it might take you hours to do this manually. This is right out of the box. You can sit here and refresh this if you happen to have Cube. If not, you know, at least you can see how it's done. You know that there is capabilities here. All right, let's go back. I've got 15 minutes left here. Okay. So what I want to focus on a little bit here is getting into the ability to analyze labor. So at the moment, I just have job name and job cost in here. Let's take out the years. And let's bring in the field that we had where we had payroll hours. Let's bring in hours here. We'll put hours above job cost for the moment. Now, you look at this and goes, well, it doesn't really tell me much. So we put some things in here for you that allow you to analyze your data a little bit better. So first thing you might want to know is the employee name, right? And so we do have employee up here. Let's just drag the employee name below the job name. Let's expand this. So, you know, a lot of this is one of these sample files. Is kind of, so here's like a basement remodeling. So Elizabeth's got 4 hours. Greg has got 80 hours. And you're saying, well, that's fine. I'd like to a little more detail. This is one of these things where it's nice. In QuickBooks, they don't do it by the item level a lot of times. So for instance, if I brought the item in here, at least in this sample file, you should do it by the item name because it makes it easier to compare. But if I bring in job then item, if you want to know how to get rid of these subtotals here, you go up to design, subtotals, and do not show subtotals. So you can see up here, right, this was no item, that information. Let's collapse this here for a second. And this was to no item. In the paycheck detail, right, you want to assign the time towards an item so that you get to compare your particular data. Now, let's go further. I brought in the item name. Let me take that out for the moment. I have job name and employee name. Let's leave it at that for the moment. Let's go to payroll item. This is where you get to analyze a little deeper. So I actually have three things here. Okay. So first we kind of have the category. And you can see this is really split into wage and non-wage, right? Wage and non-wage. Then we have payroll item type, and this is a little more granular piece of the information. I hate these subtotals. Drive me nuts. Okay. So under wage, you can see that we have, right, different payroll item types. And you're saying, why is hourly sick here and vacation here? Well, one of the things that you do in QuickBooks when you, let me see, add or edit. Hello. No, I don't want your schedule. Oh, let's just do this anyway here. When you're looking into detail figures, I picked the wrong person, Mason there. He does a lot of this grunt work here. When you set up QuickBooks, you get to set up the items, and the problem is these items may appear whether you actually have hours in them or not. And it's great for auto-filling in your information. The problem is that these are going to appear in QuickBooks as a $0 amount, and they just take up a ton of space. Over time, when you look at the line items for payroll, they're much longer than anything else in QuickBooks, and that's part of the reason. So if you have something that's not part of your calculation, it just adds to the mess in your QuickBooks. You're just going to add to your file, and your file is already going to get big when it comes to payroll. So that's a lot of times you will see that you have the zero in here. So anyway, you have the payroll category, which is wage and non-wage. Then you have the item type, and then lastly you would have the payroll item name. So again, it allows you to filter on certain things. If I wanted to look at, say, a particular item type, right, I bring this into my slicers over here. And I just say, well, who worked overtime, right? Then you can see how many hours you did within a period. Again, this is the ability to analyze this. You know, in a different fashion that you couldn't do before. Everybody's going, well, how many hours did we spend on something? You set up a pivot table with slicers, you'll be able to analyze this any way that you want to. Okay. All right, one last thing before I take any questions here. Last one has to do with payroll and time tracking. And this is probably one of the most common questions we get asked, and yet it is the most common misperception. Okay, when you enter time for an employee, right, and you have checked off in QuickBooks that you use a timesheet in QuickBooks for your paycheck. Then you come up to employees, and then you pay your employees, and you pull this over, and if these employees you've got the pay from the time tracking, it goes ahead and creates that pay based upon the time tracking. But here's the thing to note. There is no link between those two items. Even though you can create payroll from this activity, QuickBooks doesn't keep any type of link underneath the hood for that. And there's a reason for that. You can't keep what we call referential integrity for that. Okay? Because I could come back into this time entry and I could change this to 9 hours and not change it in the check, right? And I'm still allowed to do that. Conversely, I could go into the check and say, oh, somebody forgot to put in their hours. I put in 10 hours, but yet I don't have 10 hours in time tracking. Okay. So guess what? You don't have any link. There's no tie between those two. Some people would like to say, I'd like to know the hours that I put in and the hours that I paid. All right. Well, you've got a second limitation to that. Most times, you pay after your hourly. So if you put your payroll in today for this week, you may not get paid to next week. So when you're looking at your job costing is only going to have right? If I have information about payroll, it's going to have for the date of the payroll. It doesn't have any hours or associated billings or cost with those hours. Now, if you run something like Timberline, Master Builder, when you're doing time, you get to actually enter an estimated cost figure. You really can't do that in QuickBooks, okay? What we have done is a little bit different here. I'm going to get rid of all these values here. I'm going to keep the employee name here just for a second. That'll be fine. I'm going to get a filter up here that says job cost details. I want document type. I'm going to bring this in here to refilter. And I want to filter this to just time tracking. And what I want to do is I'm going to bring in a my time tracking quantity over here. Take all this over here. Whoops. Time tracking quantity. You notice that I've got several pieces up here, okay? I've got an entity-based billing amount, and then I've also got a job-based billing amount. This is based upon the rate that we've assigned for the item that Dan Miller put on his time tracking. This field over here, entity-based, okay, this is based upon the price level that you have assigned for the item for that job. It has nothing to do with the employee, okay? So in this case, you can get to calculate in a WIP, but the problem is it's not cost. It's your billing amount, okay? So you would have to create some type of calculated field to say, take my quantity, and for Dan Miller, I would use a custom field and say, Dan Miller, it's $30 or it's $20 or whatever it is. Or you could do it at the item level. That's how you're going to do that, okay? And last thing, I'm running out of time, so I'm probably glossing over some of this for you. Last piece I didn't discuss was how to handle things like project manager, supervisor. So this is what you do in your custom field. Go into your customer center over here, okay? And what you can do is you create custom fields. And I know it's hard because of QuickBooks, right? But you notice that I have custom fields for supervisor, and you make those drop downs, and I have manager, and I have job rep. Okay? You never use a sales rep, and the reason why sales rep, if you put it on a transaction, it's only on the sales-based transaction. You can't put it on a bill, can't put it anywhere else. And there is no such thing as a sales rep for a job. There's a sales rep for a customer. There is a sales rep for a job if it is a customer, right, like I showed you before. But once you create a job, sales rep field is no longer available. So this would be the way that you would aggregate your information. And in our case, what we've done for you is that in Cube, we actually have, you can do this based upon just a regular Cube query. And it says here are our custom fields, and it lets you know, okay, in this case, it says contract supervisor is job custom field 2, manager is 3, and sales rep is 4. So that means I could come into this here. Let's go to job. And now I can drag my custom field. Let's get rid of employee name here. I could do custom field, right? Let me drag these all in, then I'll get rid of the subtotals and make it easier. So now we have manager, supervisor, sales rep, however I put that, okay? So again, at a glance, if I wanted to, I could use this as a slicer, right? I could see what AD did, then I could just see what his jobs were.